Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. In this session, we'll be exploring one of the most pressing and forward-thinking topics in our digital age, ethical AI. As generative AI continues to revolutionize industries, it brings us new challenges to how we manage cyber risks, ensure due diligence, and meet regulatory compliance. I'm John DeMaria, Director of Operations Excellence for CSA, and joining me today is good friend and colleague Karen Warstel, CEO and founder of W Risk Group. We're going to provide you today with some insight and strategies that organizations can adopt to deploy AI responsibly. We'll cover key topics such as mitigating emerging risks, data privacy issues, developing a robust AI governance framework, and navigating the complex regulatory landscape, including GDPR. So our goal here is really to demonstrate that due diligence, grounded in a defensible standard of care, not only mitigates risks, but also provides a competitive edge and in this emerging market. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about where we're at today. What do we actually need? Some of the normative standards and that can help you in terms of providing a standard of care. And then what's the benefits of doing this? And of course, we always want to look at risks, what can go wrong, and then look at some emerging issues and look into our crystal ball of where we think this is going from here, and giving you some of our closing remarks. Right now, many in the industry are grappling with the complexity of ethics and robust security in AI. The landscape is really cluttered with various standards, regulations, and frameworks. We have these plethora of controls and compliance issues that we have to look at every day of our lives. So the diversity can be pretty confusing. And so it can really make it challenging for organizations to determine which guidelines to follow and how to implement them effectively, especially with AI now that it's sort of exploded and really in some cases, arguably, some people may think it's a little bit, out of control today. So, for instance, some might be familiar with ISO standards. Others focus on regional regulations like GDPR, CCPA. So the lack of universally accepted frameworks, the universally accepted way of doing things for AI ethics really adds to the complexity. And as we know, more complexity means more risk and higher cost to an organization. So it can really leave organizations unsure on how to proceed. So, so we're gonna get started here, and I'm gonna turn this over to Karen, and she'll kind of kick off, what we need to do going from
Sure
here.
thing. John, it's great to be with you and talking about this today. And, for years, John and I have gone back and forth on this topic, particularly what does it mean to demonstrate due diligence to a defensible standard of care? And the reason that we talk about that is that security has been complex for a long time. And now AI has come in, and the whole idea of trustworthy AI and ethics in AI is just kind of exploded what was already a difficult, complex arena and made it even worse. So we came up with this context over the last, I think it's been 20 years, to say, let's do this. Like, if I need to go back and have develop a framework rather than just adopt one that's a generic one that's try to be one size fits all, I'm going to generic or adopt the framework that's going to work for my business and my use case in my application of AI? What do I need to do? And so we take a really conservative approach based on international standards. And I think, and my hope is that that's going to really help us because, as you saw in the prior slide, one of the things that we really have to deal with is globalization. AI in South America, AI in Africa, AI in Asia, AI in China, and in America are going to be different because AI has to conform to local societal norms. And so coming up with what constitutes the specific prescriptive controls is going to be tough. So if we come up and we start to adopt with international standards, that's the meta layer above everything else. It's above the regulations. It's above the local statutes that we're starting to see appear. So what does that mean? It means that the very first thing that I think people need to do, and this is important for all governance and all risk management, is to establish the business context in which the AI application is going to be used. Whether it's going to be in a federal or a state and local application, or whether it's going to be in a private sector, that context is incredibly important. And you can get a sense for what this means by looking at the international standards like ISO 31000, ISO 38500 are great, guides to use to tell us how to move forward with this. And then it's a matter of really understanding what is the risk and the risk identification and the risk appetite. Like, what is your bar? And this is a process that's iterative. It involves a lot of stakeholders in the company. This is a very important part of governance. And so we really want to encourage this piece. And it feels like this is a piece that, as a formalized, documented step in the process, often gets skipped. So it's fundamentally important. The next one is the piece that hangs. Oops, no, not the next slide. There we go. I'm on number 4, statement of objectives. If you can once you understand what the business context is of the application and the risk, or the overall risk profile, you can say, these are the statement of objectives. These are the things that we're going to ensure are true. And then the next question on control design becomes, if those are my statement of objectives of what it is I want to make sure is in place for our trustworthy AI, what will it take for that to be true? And that's what leads to your control design, which is where kind of all the fun starts. And you get down to implementation and then going into the very, very important piece of monitoring it, maintaining it, and measuring it. I will just make one little statement here that technical debt is, in my opinion, our most significant threat to the protection and integrity and availability of data. And so what we want to make sure is that the necessary steps in step 7 there are the things that avoid technical debt becoming a long-term problem, particularly in the area of AI. So very, very important. All of these 7 steps, very important to do. That's a very high level, very quick overview. Okay, now we can do the next slide. So what are the benefits? And John, I'll offer some perspectives on this, and then I'd love you to jump in. We've been talking about the way we do demonstrating due diligence for a defensible standard of care. One of the huge benefits we saw of taking a conservative approach, call it the high road if you want, we end up doing a build once and a comply many. What does that mean? It means that every time you get a new regulatory tweak or a new statutory rule or something like that comes along, you've already thought about that problem because you took the conservative approach. You decided to build it to that high level standard. You don't end up having to respond over and over again to some kind of a new fire drill with a new compliance requirement coming along. We are also finding that one of the things that we're going to really need to be considering when we go into AI governance and risk management and all of that, building trustworthy AI, is demonstrating is a duty of care. So the duty of care is essentially making sure that when you are evaluating your risk, you're evaluating risk from the perspective of all stakeholders. This is just baked into ISO 27001. It's been around for a long time. It's not often done, and now it's part of what we call the DOCRA standard, and it's being incorporated into consumer protection laws in multiple states. And so you want to make sure that you take that high road, because what we're finding is when you take the high road, and let's just say something extraordinary happens and there is a fault and there is potentially even litigation, you have a better chance of having some kind of legal safe harbor if you've taken that conservative approach, and you can show your homework and show how you've really done that. Reduced risk and increased resilience. We've demonstrated this in the implementations where we followed this kind of approach, that the project tends to pay back big time over time, because the increased efficiencies, the increase, the risk reduction. I'll give you an example. When you start actually finding huge increased efficiencies from your business operations because of AI, but also because of the back office operations of IT are all running better, it just saves you money. So that's where that increased resilience and reduced risk comes from, as well as lower cost. Maybe I should have called that business efficiency. Anyway, John, do you want to talk a little bit about stakeholder trust and brand identity?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's important to mention, the build once, comply many. Karen coined the phrase implement once, comply many years ago. And since then, many people have stolen that, which means that it radiated very well with everyone. And I think this is the message behind here, because all of these things we're mentioning here have to come together to be cohesive. Yeah, I mean, stakeholder trust. I mean, what's more than the stakeholders, and ensuring that you know that you're building trust, with your stakeholders, uh, whether they be internal or external, or perceived stakeholders. So looking at the context of your organization and trying to understand who those stakeholders are. Brand identity. I mean, that's exactly what is brand and identity. Brand is your identity, right? So, uh, really important to understand that once, damage is, done to your brand identity, um, there's issues there. So the benefits here obviously are, to increase and sort of protect, your brand, but more so, give you a competitive edge from that perspective of things. And then, of course, you know, the the, the business efficiencies, and Karen, you could expand on this, but what's more efficient than a integrated, minimum complexity, process, that can be monitored and improved, on a real-time basis.
Yeah, I'd love to go back to brand identity a little bit too, and just kind of tag onto that, because honestly, in an environment where AI deployment, I think there's a fair amount of FUD involved in all of this, and that some of it might be, it's caution is well advised. At the same time, those companies that can say they've embraced transparency, they've embraced fairness, they've embraced accountability, and they can talk about that, and they share how they've done that with their customers, is going to go a long way to making people feel more comfortable that they are a provider or a service provider with AI capabilities that they can trust. And so I think that's going to be increasingly important. And even if you look at the SEC rules, providing that kind of visibility of how we do the risk management is going to go a long way towards helping even shareholders take a look at how we are managing the environment, and whether we're doing a good job of managing the risk. And for AI implementations, that is going to be a part of the conversation when it comes to the SEC. So
points. Good points. Well, let's move on. And of course, let's talk about risk. What can go wrong, right? Risks are increased for various reasons. Does AI, meet your objectives? You know, failing to adapt and approach, can lead to significant issues without a defensible standard of care. Organizations without a defensible standard of care, organizations are really, becoming insecure, or they're not compliant with regulations. This can result, of course, as we all know, in legal penalties, um, loss of that stakeholder trust that we talked about, and even harm individuals or society, as a whole. So, for example, let's just say if an AI system is deployed without rigorous bias audits, it could perpetuate existing inequalities or can make unfair decisions. Similarly, inadequate security measures could leave AI models vulnerable to attacks. We know what can happen with misconfigurations, and that compromises sensitive data and eroding user confidence. So it could put roadblocks against emerging legislations. Um, it can cause incidents, of course, and security failures, that brand harm that we talked about, uh, and of course, just not being protected, and that's legally, that's probably not a good place to be. Uh, there's a lot of standards here. Karen mentioned standardization and why use standardization. Obviously, that's anything that's you have internationally accepted ways of doing things is always a way uh, of protecting yourself by implementing methodology that involves it really involves several key steps. We don't have time to talk about them all, but you need to conduct that thorough risk assessment and audit, and of course non-bias audits against deploying AI systems, understanding how it's going to be utilized, how it's going to be used, and so utilizing tools like key fairness indicators, can help identify potential issues early on. Uh, Next, you also have to align yourself with AI practices with established standards like ISO IEC 23894 for risk management, 42001 for governance. Standards like this provide really a solid framework for ensuring that AI systems are ethical, secure, and compliant. And then, of course, that all important continuous monitoring, and and making sure that implementation is done correctly. That's really essential to implementing good governance practices. And AI is not a you know not a set it and forget it technology, right? This thing's growing by leaps and bounds every day. So regular reviews and updates are really necessary. And so continuous monitoring really becomes very critical. A lot of standards here. We talk about, Karen mentioned 31,000 for risk management. So anything that really promotes the use and acceptance of internationally accepted standards is going to provide you with a defensible standard of care that you can build on.
Yeah. Can I would just add, and kind of put a pin in what John is saying there. The point of kind of the whole point of our presentation and what we want to encourage people to do is to find kind of a clear path forward by adopting. We have NIST 600-1. There's other things that are going to be coming out. We have lots of regulations. We have lots of statutes. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I wanted to just come back and say, taking that conservative approach and that high road, you want to be able to point to a definitive standard that no one's going to really argue with, right? If I used to say when I was doing a lot of CISO work that if I were to be deposed by hostile counsel, I wanted to be able to say that I can show you and prove to you that the controls that we have in place are the necessary and sufficient controls for this business and this usage of the technology. And I can prove to you that they're operational and effective 100% of the time. How do I make the case that I am using something that really nobody, I didn't make this up. I went back to the source and got the definitive standard that I can point to that says this comes from here. So things like, COBIT, IDLE, and ISO standards are a fantastic resource to point to in order to take the best practices out of there and be able to show your homework as you've done your business context and determined what standards are applicable and putting that into basically your custom-made framework for the purposes of the implementation of trustworthy AI. So there's a long list of standards. If you reach out to us after this, after you watch the video and you want to find out more about what standards we recommend, I don't think we have an exhaustive list in here, but I would suggest making a library of those standards and getting familiar with them, because that will really help you in the end when you're deciding, what the overall conservative approach needs to look like for your company.
Well, while we got you on a roll here, maybe look into your crystal ball, Karen, for us for a minute. Where do we see this whole thing going?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. The look ahead. The AI is it going to explode? We're going to see the technology gap grow between the technology adoption and the security controls that are generally adopted and in place. So we're going to have some challenges, I think, coming up. A big one around the ethical considerations, though, and ethical implementations of implications, for automated decision making. So high risk automated decision making is already banned in the EU, and other decision making applications using AI will require a human in the loop. So we've got a lot of conversations and a lot of education to still do to make sure that people understand this. And I think another very interesting area to look at from looking ahead is the emerging legislation. So we have, right now, we have 2 states that are engaged in new legislation relating to AI. One is Colorado, the other is California. They are very different rules. The Colorado one is already signed by the governor, but it's going to change before it goes into implementation in 2026. The other one is, this is being recorded in September 2024. So if you're looking at it in the future, there is currently a bill, Senate Bill 1074, I believe it is, in California on Governor Newsom's desk for signature. He has until the end of the month to sign it. That kind of bill is looking at regulating very large LLMs, ones that cost over $100 million to implement. But it has a lot of interesting ethical implications in it, because somehow there has to be assurances provided that this cannot cause significant harm. We're still trying to discern the path forward in legislation between what is the responsibility of the AI developers and what is the responsibility of AI implementers and users. And so this is like, watch this space. But for those companies that are doing early adoption of AI, what you don't want to see is that you get down the road and you end up having to redo an implementation because you didn't see this coming. So there's going to be a lot more regulation, a lot more rules that are coming out. The DOJ is looking at some new rules. The FTC has rules out. So just if you take that conservative approach, it's going to pay off for you in the long run. It's, I think, the main point here. And using internationally recognized standards will help us because they're at a level above the prescriptive controls. So that when you're choosing something, especially if you're a multinational organization, you're going to have to deal with jurisdictional differences. And if you can find a path forward based on high level general, internationally accepted principles, then you'll have a good base to work from going forward on that. And yeah, and for your attorneys, you might want to engage them in the conversation on AI adoption very early. If you are a multinational company, you will run into multi-jurisdictional challenges for oversight and enforcement. So yeah, there's going to be fun and games. If we thought that the whole privacy landscape was complicated, wait till we get to AI, because it's going to be loads of fun.
Yeah. So I think essentially, as we close out here, it's just I mean, the whole message is right here. Just demonstrate due diligence, defensible standard of care. I think we have to, we should have maybe gave a disclaimer at the beginning that neither one of us are lawyers. But we've both worked very long in this space, and I've worked e-discovery for quite a while. Karen's been researching this and involved in this type of thing for many years. So we've done a lot of research, but definitely engage your general counsel, and get them involved in promoting the right strategy to put together that solid methodology and AI governance. And that's really part of the due diligence part, right? Is having the right people involved, good cross-functional team of the right experts, including general counsel. So we urge that. We have a lot of information. I know we're running a little bit over time here, so we're going to have to close this out, but we'll be here for questions. We have a lot of information available. So just let us know. Information's there on the screen. So yeah, thanks for listening today, and thanks, Karen, for joining me.
Great. Thanks, John. It's great doing this together.